parents gave me up for adoption when I was 6 because I was a boy. Now, after 20 years, they're asking me for money for my sister's college. I'm 25 years old. My story goes all the way back to when I was 6, or really, since the day I was born. I'm the third and youngest child of my parents. We weren't rich, but they earned just enough to raise 3 kids. We lived in a small town in an old family house, which helped save a lot of money. My grandparents owned a farm that provided much of what we needed for our meals. My dad worked as a truck driver and would come home every 3 or 4 days. My mom was a waitress. By the time I was conceived, my parents already had 2 daughters. I was the unplanned one, and you know the mixed feelings parents have when an unplanned child shows up. I didn't understand any of this as a kid, but as I grew up, I slowly began to grasp it, and it hurt to learn that I wasn't wanted. My parents wanted to get rid of me, but the doctor advised against it because it might have seriously harmed my mom's health. My parents, especially my mom, wanted a girl. Their reason was simple. She wanted me to wear the hand-me-down clothes from my older sisters so she wouldn't have to buy new ones for me. My 2 older sisters were only about a year apart in age, so they practically wore the same clothes, and they even swapped them around for fun. However, when I was born a boy, my parents were disappointed. They hated me. They dressed me in girls' clothes and even sent me to school in my sister's old uniforms. It was incredibly embarrassing as a kid. Even though I was very young then, I still have a hazy memory of being bullied for wearing a girl's uniform and having long hair. Whenever I complained, all I got was a beating from my mom. I grew up hearing nothing but abuse and harsh words from my parents, most of which I didn't understand at the time, and when I did, I hated them even more. My dad was better than my mom, but he was absent most days and was unpredictable. Some days, he seemed impartial with the 3 of us, and other days, he was just as mean as my mom. Not to mention, I wasn't exactly an angel as a kid either. I acted out when I began to understand how they favored my sisters while I got the leftovers. So, I started acting out toward them, blaming them for my misery. Yes, I was punished for my actions, sometimes very harshly. I had to make my own breakfast and often ended up without dinner. I was just a 6-year-old kid going through this. There's one incident I remember vividly that I think marked a turning point in my life. I don't recall exactly whether it was that day or week, but I was being relentlessly bullied on the playground for dressing like a girl. I got home to find that my mom had brought new clothes for my sisters for the holidays, and, boom, I grabbed a pair of scissors and turned them into confetti. I know it was mean, and I'm not proud of it, but I was fed up with being ridiculed because of my parents. I came from a place of pain, not malice. Instead of understanding my hurt, my parents saw it as a sin that deserved the harshest punishment of all. They put me up for adoption. They waited a month, but no one came forward, and that anger was turned back on me. I was constantly told how useless I was and that nobody wanted me. There were times I heard my mom say, "I wish I had known your gender. Then I'd never have brought you into this world." It still haunts me that my parents hated me so much for reasons beyond my control. After a while, when nothing came of the adoption process, they started discussing it with their friends and family. My dad knew someone in the next town over who ran a food truck with his wife. They were even poorer than we were, but they wanted a child. They were in their 30s and had been trying for a child for over a decade with no luck. My dad talked to them, and they agreed to adopt me right away. I remember the moment when my dad broke the news to my mom and my sisters. They were thrilled to be rid of me. My dad also warned them that they were poor and that I might never even go to school. My mom rolled her eyes and said, "Who cares? Just take him there tomorrow." I stood in a corner, clutching the curtain, stunned. Even though I hated my family, I was scared and hurt to be leaving them. Tears welled up in my eyes, but I didn't cry out loud. They were so happy, caught up in the moment, they completely forgot I was even there. When my dad saw me crying, he came over, patted my back, and said, "Pack your things." "We're leaving tomorrow morning for your new family." I cried out loud then, but I knew it would fall on deaf ears. So, I went to my room, packed my things, and prayed that my new family wouldn't be as cruel. The next day, my dad took me to the neighboring town. I don't exactly remember how I felt, but I wasn't crying anymore. Maybe I was just numb as I left home and rode along. My new family was really poor. They had a small house with one room. They had converted their storage room into my bedroom. I had no complaints because at least they made an effort to give me my own space. I'd never had a proper bedroom before. My sisters had beds, and I was put on a bed in a corner of their room with a small closet for my things. It was much smaller than what I'd been used to, but it was cozy. My new parents, Mary and John, were warm and loving, but I came from a troubled home. I'd never experienced that kind of love. Sure, I saw them show affection to my sisters, but not to me. I doubted their intentions and thought their love was temporary. I tried not to get too close, for fear they might kick me out too. Childhood trauma, you know. It took me months to realize that they really did love me and weren't just pretending. That first year, I didn't even go to school because my new parents moved me in the middle of the term, but they promised to enroll me the following year. I saw how hard they worked to save up money for my schooling. That's when I started to care for them back. My adoption turned out to be a blessing in disguise. My biological parents never showed up after sending me off with Mary and John. Honestly, I was relieved because here I was finally treated for who I was, a kid. Mary and John were incredibly hardworking. They worked 14 to 16 hours a day on their food truck. The truck was parked just outside their apartment, so I was never alone when they were working. I could watch them from my bedroom window. Over time, I began spending my days at the truck, helping out however I could. When I eventually started school, I dedicated all my time to studying, but I still helped out with chores when I could. When I was a little over 10, I even helped John at the cash register. I was pretty good with numbers, so I learned a lot about business and accounting from a very young age. After high school, I wanted to devote myself completely to their business, but both Mary and John insisted I finish college first. They used their savings to finance it. They were getting too old and weak to run a food truck. I wanted to take on responsibility the same way they did for me, but they assured me they could manage for a few more years and that I should keep up with my studies. I ended up studying business and accounting in college because I ultimately wanted to be an entrepreneur. The day I graduated was the happiest day of my life, and Mary and John were over the moon. They even invited my biological parents to the ceremony, but they didn't show up. After college, I planned to run the food truck and let Mary and John retire, but they had other plans for me. They had saved up a good amount of money and handed it over to me. I was overwhelmed by their gesture. They said they could survive on their own for a few more years but didn't want me involved in that life. They gave me the money to start my own business. I didn't want to waste their money blindly, so I put my business skills to use. I found a small local restaurant in a good location that was struggling with sales. I pitched a profit-sharing lease model to the owner. After several rejections, I finally got one. I started from scratch, renovated the place, updated the menu to suit millennial and Gen Z tastes, and offered top-notch service to customers. Sales skyrocketed within a year, and I doubled my investment in profit. 4 years later, I now own 3 successful cafes in the city. I even upgraded Mary and John's home to a better apartment. I found a small place of my own. I had been living with them up until now. I asked them to get rid of their food truck and enjoy their retirement, but they insisted on keeping it for their own happiness. When I left their home with my suitcase, I never imagined I'd become a college graduate, but here I am, running a chain of restaurants in the city. Fast forward to last month. It was a normal day at work. I was busy at the cash register at one of the restaurants when I saw a familiar face. It felt like I was seeing a ghost. It was my biological dad. I hadn't seen him in almost 2 decades. He looked pale and weak. He walked across the store with a big smile and hugged me. There were customers around, so I didn't say much and led him to a corner. His face brought back all the heartbreaking memories of my childhood. I wouldn't have been able to write down so many details about my past if they hadn't reappeared in my life. He said he was so happy and proud to see me successful. I didn't know what to say. I just stood there, frozen. He mentioned he was just passing through and that he'd run into John, who had told him about my successful business. He said he'd bring my mom over that weekend. I didn't say much, and he left shortly after. After my day ended, I talked with John and told him I didn't want to meet my biological parents. After all, they had disowned me for being a boy. They knew all about my painful childhood. I felt like running away and hiding somewhere for the weekend, but Mary insisted that I forgive my parents and move on. I agreed to meet them, on the condition that Mary and John be there with me. So, my biological parents came to John's place. I thought they'd apologize for what they did, but instead, they started listing all the favors they'd done for me. My mom said I should be grateful to them for finding such good parents who raised me to be a successful person. I was stunned hearing that. I wanted to give back, but Mary grabbed my hand, telling me to calm down. I diplomatically said that I felt blessed to have John and Mary as my parents. I can honestly say the meeting was very awkward for me. The next day, I received a call from my mom. I barely recognized her voice. How could I? It was the first time she'd called in 20 years. She was asking for money. She said that Dad had lost his regular job and had been working on contract jobs for years. She'd also lost her job because, apparently, no restaurant needs a 50-year-old waitress. They were struggling to make ends meet. I asked how much she needed, and she said $20,000 would suffice. She had been borrowing that money from friends over the past few months to buy food for the house. Now her friends were asking for it back, and she had nothing. I hung up, saying I'd think about it and call back. Now, the thing is, as much as I hate them, I feel bad knowing that people are chasing them for money. Part of me feels like they're just taking advantage of me, but what if they really need help? I'd feel guilty for letting them go through this shame even though I have the money. Before continuing, don't forget to subscribe. New stories every day. Update 1. Thanks for all the comments and compliments. I got pretty mixed reactions from people about helping my mom with the $20,000. I later discussed it with Mary and John. Mary was happy I was considering helping my parents, but she also warned me to be careful. John said it was my money, so I should be the one making the decision. Did they share the same concerns as I did? That maybe they were trying to take advantage of my emotions? After thinking it over a lot, I agreed to make this one and last bet with my biological parents and transferred the money into their account. I felt good about being able to help my family, even though they were cruel to me, but I was wrong. In hindsight, I guess I had a point worrying they'd try to financially exploit me, and they actually are. A week after sending the money, my mom called again. I answered with mixed feelings. She thanked me for the help and then said, "Your sisters want to see you. When do you think you can come?" In that moment, I really felt like my family wanted me back. I know my parents hurt me when I was a kid, and I hated them for it, but I've never hated my sisters. Maybe I did some bad things to them when we were little, but as we grew up, I never held it against them. It wasn't their fault. I even sometimes thought that maybe my parents got rid of me because they were poor, not because they were truly evil. I told my mom we could meet the following Sunday and that I could drive to their place. She interrupted, asking, "Why don't we meet somewhere else?" I didn't think too much about it and just said yes. She said she'd send the details about the place and time later. After hanging up, I felt uneasy, like she didn't want me to visit the house. I mean, sure, it doesn't matter where you meet, but still. When you reunite with your family after so many years, wouldn't you want them to come to your place instead of meeting at a restaurant? However, she did send me the details for a restaurant, and it turned out to be one of the fanciest in town. At that moment, I didn't dwell on it too much because I was fixated on not being invited to their home. When I arrived at the restaurant, they were already there. My sisters ran up to hug me. For a moment, I was happy to see them after so many years. I had a great time catching up, until the menu came and they started ordering the most expensive items. When they asked what my father wanted, he just smiled and said, "Order the priciest, my son is a big man now." That was such a petty thing for him to say. Had Mary not been there, I might have been a proud son. But coming from my biological parents felt just as cruel as it was mean. There was nothing I could do. I sat there watching them devour their food while I picked through my wallet. Yes, I even paid the bill. I had some wild thoughts about just disappearing before the check came, but that would have been too harsh on them. I vowed right then never to fall for their emotional trap again. I kept it cool for the rest of the afternoon. I bet they didn't even notice. When I left, they still didn't invite me over. Instead, my older sister asked, "Where are we going to have dinner now?" I forced a smile and said, "Nowhere," and then said goodbye. I got back and told Mary about my greedy family. She was shocked to hear it. She's such a kind and independent woman that she found it all very disturbing. She advised me not to be foolish again and not to overthink them. Just focus on my own life. And that's what I did. My sisters called about a week later, but I didn't answer. My mom also called, but I didn't pick up. It's been 2 months now, and they've stopped texting or calling. I think they got the hint that I don't want them in my life. Update 2. Hi everyone, thanks for all the support. As I mentioned in my last post, I stopped responding to my sisters and my biological parents because I realized they only wanted me for my money. Almost 5 months later, my mom called again yesterday. I saw the phone ringing and answered off the cuff. She started with some small talk, asking about me and my work. It sounded so fake and pretentious that I couldn't stand it, so I asked, "What do you want?" She took a deep breath and said that my sisters had to drop out of college because dad couldn't pay their tuition, so they expected me to finance their education. I got really angry. She pleaded with me to calm down, insisting that they're my sisters, my family, and I should help them. I was at work at that moment and didn't want to lose it, so I hung up. My mom called again in the afternoon. I ignored the call a few times, but it was really starting to bug me. Ignoring wasn't the solution. I knew next time I'd have to answer. When I did, she asked, "Your sisters are really excited about going back to college. So, how are we going to do this? Are you going to pay it all at once or per semester? I suggest you transfer the full amount to me, and I'll handle the tuition before each semester. You don't have to complicate things." I said, "Hold on a minute, I'm not going to make any payment." She was so surprised. She didn't expect me to refuse. She pressed, "What do you mean you don't want to pay? Is paying all at once okay? We could also do installments." I repeated, "I'm not paying in any form. My older sister's education isn't my responsibility, especially when my parents abandoned me and never cared about me. Even now, you're only talking to me because you want to take advantage of my money." That pushed her over the edge. She exploded, "Don't forget we gave birth to you. Everything you are is thanks to us. Your dad found you a good family, and now, when it's your turn to repay us, you can't dodge your responsibilities. Your sisters and your parents are your responsibility. You have to take care of all of us." I had so much more to say, but it felt like talking to deaf narcissists. So I just replied, "Sure, I owe a lot to my parents, that's John and Mary. They deserve all the credit for my success. And you? I don't even know who you are. None of my documents have your name, and I have no photos with you, so I really don't know you." I tossed in a few insults, then added, "Wrong number, ma'am," and hung up. Call me selfish, cruel, or whatever, but I'm not about to squander the money I earned with so much hard work on my so-called family. They were never my real family. They abandoned me when I was only 6. And yes, I've received comments on my earlier updates about calling John and Mary by their names instead of Mom and Dad. The truth is, I do call them Mom and Dad, just not right away after I came to live with them. Once they took me to school, worked tirelessly to meet my needs, and loved me. I grew attached and started calling them mom and dad. For the sake of telling my story here, I mentioned their names. John and Mary are my real parents. As for my biological parents, I don't call them anything. To me, they simply don't exist.